Hey guys, Brandon with Flyin Miata, back for another FM Live. Today we are going to talk about clutches, specifically ND clutches. We have been working on these guys for an embarrassingly long time, but they are finally ready, and I am very excited about it. So, as always, questions, drop them in the comments. We'll try to get to them live. If we don't get to them live, we'll get to them after the fact. Why do you need a clutch? Well, the power that your engine makes should probably go to the wheels. Details. So that's why you need a clutch. Honestly, the stock clutch is pretty good. We use it on our turbo cars typically. They do a good job of holding the power up to a certain point and up to a certain driving style, I suppose. Most people are fine with a stock clutch, but then once the stock clutch wears out, or if you're going especially bonkers, you're going to want something that's a little bit stronger. And this is it. So we have, I'll kind of go through the different parts. So we've got the clutch itself here. So nice pressure plate. And the disc, this is an organic disc. This guy will hold 340 pound-feet of torque at the crank, which is substantial. So if you're making that much in your ND, that is extremely impressive. So that also comes with the bearings. You get your release bearing, you got your pilot bearing, you've got your alignment tool. We have two different kinds of thread locker so that you use the right kind in the right location. And then we've got a bunch of hardware here. So that's hardware to hold the plate to the flywheel and then also the flywheel to the crank. So that's the clutch half of it. Now, it is important to note that this clutch will not work on your stock flywheel. So this is 240 millimeters in diameter. Your stock disc is 220 millimeters in diameter. So this clutch, this disc specifically, is too big to fit on your stock flywheel. Now, vice versa, our new flywheels here will fit the stock clutch. So if you want to keep the stock clutch, but you want a lightweight flywheel, awesome, that's no problem. The friction surface on these guys is machined out to fit this disc, obviously. But then it will also accommodate the smaller stock disc. So we have two flywheels. This one is the ND1. It looks fairly normal. So this is a single piece chromoly, just like all of our, all of our items. It's about 5 pounds lighter than the stock flywheel. So the stock flywheel is 15.4 pounds, and this guy is 10.2. Hey, look at that, I remembered my numbers. So simple bolt-in, pretty easy to do. Now, a lightweight flywheel, why you want a lightweight flywheel is because you have a sports car and you want to make it more sports car-y. So the stock flywheel, which is here, is weighted for a specific amount of inertia to make clutch changes, to make shifting, gear changes a little bit easier, to make the car smoother, to make sure you don't have any kind of noises, that type of thing. When you take some of that inertia out, you make the car, you make it easier to rev match, you improve your engine braking, you can also improve your throttle steering. You might, if we're being really pedantic, improve your acceleration, but really that's a pretty minor thing. So drawbacks to it, you might experience a little bit of closed throttle in gear rattling on deceleration. Honestly, our flywheels are so well balanced that it's typically not very prevalent, but it is something that you need to be aware of just in case you're kind of picky like that. So this is for the ND1 again. So that's 2016 to 2018. Now in 2019, they went to a dual mass flywheel, which is this big beastly thing here that is about 19 pounds. So you can kind of see down in there, but basically the friction surface, the part that the clutch bolts to, is a separate piece from the back end which bolts to the crank. So you can see, I'm not sure if this is normal or not, but you can see that those are two totally different pieces. So this guy, you can see he's pretty thick to match the dimensions here, but this guy is a single piece. So there's no dual mass in this at all. It still drops about 5 pounds. So again, 19 pounds here. This one's 14.2 pounds on this one. And so to veer into the subjective a little bit, I like lightweight flywheels. I think they're great. I think everybody who is not a drag racer and who enjoys the sports car aspect of their sports car should have a lightweight flywheel. If the benefit to a lightweight flywheel in totally arbitrary imagination is 10% on a normal car, it's going to be 30% subjectively with this thing. I am a huge fan of this flywheel for the ND2s. Honestly, I never really had a big problem with the dual mass. It was fine. The car did what I wanted it to do. It wasn't really a problem. And then we put this guy in there, and I was kind of blown away. So I will stop rambling, but I am a big fan, suffice to say. So there you go. Yeah, so that is it. So we've got our clutch here, 340 pound-feet. We've got our ND1 flywheel that takes about 5 pounds off the stock one, and we have our ND2 flywheel that also takes about 5 pounds off of that stock one. Now you cannot put an ND1 flywheel into an ND2 trans. There are obvious dimensional differences that make it so that they are absolutely not interchangeable, so don't try to save more weight because you're going to cause yourself a giant headache. One thing I wanted to kind of remind everybody about, so we have our transmission, our ND transmission tool, removal tool here. The ND is very cool. It is very shrink wrapped around its components, which is awesome until you try to remove some of those components. Specifically the transmission. So the transmission, you have to kind of pull it back, rotate it, pull it back, rotate it a little more. And Kyle can fill us in on the specifics, but short version, it is a big giant headache. So this guy clamps with these pads here onto the side of the transmission, holds the transmission. That is to adapt it to your transmission jack. And then it rotates this way, and then it also rotates this way. So it makes it much easier to pull the transmission out of the car. So that is specific for, I mean, you have to have a transmission jack in order to use this. This is really more of a shop tool than an individual tool, but you know, if you've got a club, if you're doing a bunch of these, this is worth its weight in gold. So that is kind of my spiel. We've got some questions ahead of time, so I'll go through those first. So how does this clutch compare to stock in terms of drivability? Well, there's something I really should have talked quite a bit about. It is extremely comparable to stock. So it is not a puck clutch. It still has a sprung center section. It's a full face organic clutch. So it is a very friendly, smooth engagement kind of clutch. The pedal pressure is extremely similar to stock as well, maybe a tick higher, but nothing substantial. There can be a little bit of shuddering when you first install it. It does take a little bit longer for these to break in, maybe 500 miles, something like that. But that shuddering does go away kind of longer term once you've fully broken the clutch in. Would we recommend this as an upgrade to someone with stock power levels? I mean, you can absolutely run the clutch on a stock power level car. That's fine. Do you need to? Probably not. Do I recommend the flywheels for a stock power car? Yes, because that's not really a power handling thing. That's a feel of the car and reaction of the car to your inputs type of thing. So yes, I absolutely recommend these guys for stock power levels. So on the ND2, the center section of the stock clutch is not sprung because they're relying on the dual mass of the flywheel. So while it will physically bolt up, I would actually recommend our clutch for the ND2, even on a stock power level, if you go to the flywheel, just so that you still have that sprung component in there. So the center section, for those of you who don't know, these springs allow a little bit of give between where the clutch is clamping right here and where the input shaft is spinning right here. So these two sections will kind of do this a little bit to smooth out your inputs. And that's another thing that makes it very drivable, very friendly. Will this work on the ND2 as well? Absolutely. Just make sure you get the ND2 flywheel, and it's the same clutch between the two of them. What material is the disc friction surface made from? So it's organic. Specifically, it is a steel back woven, copper woven organic material. It's very friendly. It's what we've been using on our clutches forever. Holds the power great, and it's something that you can hand to anybody, and you don't have to explain, well, do this and don't do that, and you might stall it, or you might rip something out if you just do this. You just, here you go, drive it. What is the perfect application for this? Your car. That's what the perfect application of this is. Basically, if you need more power handling capability in the clutch, that's a very good application. If you just want more of a revvy, better engine braking, better rev matching kind of sports car feel, it sounds very subjective in marketing and whatever else, but it is true. It is physics and inertia and all that kind of stuff, but it does make it feel much more like a sports car. So again, particularly with the ND2 setup. Did Andy serve as the development? It was one of the development cars. Yes, this flywheel, obviously ND1. So this flywheel, this clutch has been in this car for 3 years, probably. Took us a little while to get this one wrapped up. So yeah, it's that car and Travis's car as well, actually. How does it feel on a turbo car? Feels great. I mean, as far as the clutch is concerned, it feels like a stock clutch. The engagement is very smooth. Again, maybe a little bit of a shuddering during break-in, but not once it is broken in. Maybe slightly higher pedal pressure than stock, but really not very much at all, and very well behaved. And the lightweight flywheel, all of the advantages that I talked about before still apply to a turbo car. Yeah, there's load and spool and whatever. The short version is it all comes out in the wash as far as I'm concerned, and I won't get into the details there. Does this replace the ND2 dual mass flywheel? As long as you get this one, yes, it does. Will the lighter flywheel make the car rev quicker? Yes. So there's less inertia in here, so it's easier to spin. So if you hold on to a bicycle wheel, you hold on to the axle and have somebody spin it for you, that basically how it doesn't want to move, that's inertia. And that's kind of different, but kind of similar. So what are the downsides of a lighter flywheel for this engine? Noticeable increase in NVH. So yeah, that's basically, if it's a drag car, you don't want this because it is slightly harder to launch. Not from like a drivability standpoint, but from you might not get quite as good of a launch off the line kind of thing. Maybe you stall it the first time you drive it because the clutch is slightly different and the inertia is a little bit different, but it's the kind of thing you get used to very, very quickly. If you are very, very, very sensitive to any kind of noise, vibration, NVH, noise, vibration, harshness, you probably shouldn't be driving a Miata. But this might make that worse. But for most people, it's very minimal to just not noticeable at all. So it is there. It is a thing to be aware of. If you're very sensitive to that, you may not want to do this. If you're like, well, it might bug me, but probably not. I don't know. I'm not really too worked up about it. You should be fine because it's generally speaking, it's really not that bad. Will this lightweight flywheel cause transmission failure in my ND1? Seems Mazda went with the dual mass in the ND2 for a reason. So no, it is not going to cause a transmission failure. That said, the damping effect in the dual mass can have something of a preservation effect on the transmission. So if you're a very abusive driver, if you think a clutch is an on-off switch and there's nothing in between, there's no kind of slip, then maybe you don't want to push your luck with this and you should just stick with a stock one. For those of us that are reasonably smooth drivers, reasonably not abusive drivers, I think you'll be just fine. You are removing a small layer of safety by taking the dual mass out, so be aware of that. So yeah, kind of be honest with yourself. If you are an abusive driver, maybe this is not a great idea for the ND2. If you are not, then it should be just fine. For the ND1, the lightweight flywheel specifically is not going to make any kind of appreciable change to the longevity of your transmission because it's just not well, This is taking a spring out of the system that can absorb some of that abusive behavior, basically. This one never had that spring in the system to start off with, if that makes sense. Okay, so what other things should I replace when replacing the clutch, specific seals, fluids, etc.? So NDs really aren't that old. They're, you know, I guess the oldest one is 7-ish years old now. Short version, if things have failed, obviously replace them. If you want to be very proactive, you can do the rear main seal, the input seal, and the output seal. The output seal is easy to get to from the outside, so that's a little less critical. And then, sorry? Of the transmission. And then the fluid is certainly not a bad idea to do while you're in there, partially because it's going to drain all over you when you try to take it out anyway, so you might as well drain it ahead of time, unless you get our transmission plug, which does pop right into the output of the transmission and makes it so that so that it won't pee all over you. So those are the things that I would probably do while I'm in there, even though it's not that old, because I'd hate to have to go back in and do it again because it's a pain. But if you do it, be absolutely sure that you do it right, because if you replace the rear main and you don't do a good job of replacing it, then you took a perfectly good part that didn't have a problem and you caused a new problem. So be careful with that. Will this make a difference for a street car / why would I want this in my stock Miata? Everything I just said. So it makes it more of a sports car feel, revvy, engine braking, rev matching for downshifts, all that kind of stuff. Okay, what is the throwout bearing made of? So the throwout bearing is mostly metal. It's got a metal cage on it there. It does have a plastic piece here where it slides on the sleeve that goes over the input shaft. So the load is not really carried by the plastic. So it is a durable metal, nice throwout bearing. So, okay, and that is all the questions I had ahead of time. Do we have any questions? Ooh, I see frantic waving in the background. Yes, questions.
Should I be concerned about my engine's thrust bearing due to the higher pressure of the new pressure plate?
So, should I be concerned about my engine's thrust bearing because of the higher pressure of the pressure plate? No. So, the way a clutch works is that you push your throwout bearing, rides on these fingers. When you push on the clutch, you push this throwout bearing or release bearing into these fingers, which pulls this surface back, which allows the disc to spin freely. This is backwards, but which allows the disc to spin freely in there between the plate and the flywheel. So the pedal pressure that you exert via the throwout bearing is going to try to push the whole assembly through the engine effectively. Now again, the pedal pressure is not much more at all than the stock pedal pressure. So yeah, maybe there's a slight increase, but it's a negligible increase. Now what there is a big increase in is the clamping force that is clamping the disc between this surface and this surface. So there is quite a bit more force between these two surfaces in here, but that's its own contained thing that's not exerting any more force on your thrust bearing. So hopefully that makes sense. This, again, throwout bearing pushes into the thrust bearing, but that is pedal pressure only. Clamping force is clamping between these two surfaces and doesn't have anything to do with the thrust bearing in your engine. So technically, maybe slightly, realistically, no actual difference. More questions?
Would you recommend a lightweight flywheel with a supercharged ND?
Good question. Would we recommend a lightweight flywheel with a supercharged ND? So on NAs and NBs, generally speaking, that is a pretty hard no, because decreasing the inertia does make it slightly more difficult to control the idle. Now that's kind of a non-issue for a naturally aspirated car. It's a non-issue for a turbo car. For a supercharged car that has another accessory that's being driven by the engine and, more importantly, has a big throttled volume, which is not true of the ND, but for the earlier cars, the NAs and NBs that had a big throttled volume, so the idle control could be pretty rough with a lightweight flywheel. You really need that inertia to keep it live. That said, the supercharger setups that I'm aware of for the ND do not make much, if any, of an increase in the throttled volume. So that's the volume of air that's between the throttle body and the engine itself. So there's not a huge difference in the volume there, and the engine management is very good. Idle control and all that kind of stuff is very good as long as your engine management has that under control. So while we haven't tried it, I can at least say that I would be much less apprehensive about a lightweight flywheel on a supercharged ND, David, than I would on a supercharged NA. So you'll probably be fine with that. Kind of a long-winded answer, but there you go. No more questions. Okay, well, there you have it. Again, we are very excited about our new clutch, our ND1 ND2 clutch and flywheel. So these are available now. So head on over to our website and check them out. Oh, sorry, we have a last-minute question. Yes. Yeah. So adjustment, there is none. End. So on the NAs and NBs, our clutches do require quite a bit of adjustment, blah, blah, blah. On the NDs, there's literally none. On the stock pressure plate, it is actually automatic and built into the pressure plate. On this pressure plate, there is no adjustment, which should still be totally fine. And there is no adjustment that can be made on the outside. So you just don't have to worry about it. Drop it in and go. Easy peasy. So any more last minute questions? Okay. All right. Well, thank you as always for stopping by. If you have more questions later on, drop them in the comments. We will get to them as quickly as we can. A reminder, we are going to be closed next week for the holiday between Christmas and New Year's. So I hope you guys all have a great holiday. We will certainly try to, and we will kind of take a breather for a minute. So if you need us, we will be back in the new year. So if you like this, like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff, and we will see you next year. Thanks, guys.